Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first session of our third day of this year's summer winter school. I am welcoming you this morning on behalf of the Global Network for Human Rights and the Environment and the United Nations Environment Programme, who are very, very honoured to be hosting the school for the second year in a row, and particularly to be hosting this panel, which I'm so excited about, and clearly without words, which has come in part out of a collaboration between UNEP and GNHRE and the One Ocean Hub, and a remarkable group of scholars and activists, many of whom are going to be presenting this morning. Just a few notes about the school. All of our sessions are recorded. If you don't want to appear on the recording, I suggest you keep your camera off, and then your face won't appear on the recording. The recording of the sessions will be on our YouTube page and on our website. And many of the materials coming out of these sessions are also going to be uploaded onto those pages. So check it out when you get a chance. And I'm going to stop mumbling excitedly now and hand over to our moderator for the day, to Saskia van Rooyen. Saskia, over to you.
Thanks, Dina, and I just would like to extend the warm welcome to everyone joining us. I'm super delighted and excited to be in this space together with you. I'm actually joining you from another workshop I'm attending. The Joint Research Center of the European Commission is this week organizing an event on art, science and law. So I've been immersed into arts practice Monday, so I really feel like I'm being treated to a very nice week of discussing how art can actually make a difference, and something that came up in the discussions we had here in this event, and I think a wonderful panel of speakers will explore as well, that art is so much more than just communication. And what is really very exciting, I think the work that we're going to see here today, and which is also very much part of the One Ocean Hub, is that art, particularly when it starts to interact with activism, becomes a really powerful tool to make us feel connected, to share pain, traumas, but also can be used to something positive. And that's, I think, what we're really going to hear from all the speakers today, how art can be used to show us the really difficulties that we need to work with, but then use art also as a tool, as a methodology, as a thinking space, to connect us to the difficult issues we're researching. But it's also very generative. It can bring multiple voices. It can get us closer to a better understanding of other ways of being, other epistemologies, other knowledges. So it's an incredibly flexible and fluid way of understanding the world and what we're dealing with. And obviously, I mean, the topic that we're exploring here, but sort of building bridges with the week where I'm sort of immersed in the workshop here around climate change, and also there's quite a lot of artwork being presented here in this panel, but also here in Italy around oceans, and that there is such a sense of urgency. You know, a lot of the scientists, but also for lawyers, we need something, and this is, I think, where art can really be very inspirational. And I'm so much looking forward to see the presentations, and yeah, and having discussions with the wider audience, how art moves us, and in all different kind of directions, emotive, but also in terms of giving us a pathway where we need to start acting, and where we can make a difference, and how things can actually change. Because we had a lot of discussions here about that we still need to be positive, and that we still need to have hope that we can make a difference. And I think a lot of the work that we're going to see here will actually touch upon that as well. So it's my pleasure now to introduce you to this incredible panel of artists, activists, researchers who are going to share their work. And the first presentation we're going to hear is from Dylan McGarry and Kira Irwin. Kira is a sociologist, and she's been working with collectives of artists, activists, researchers, and her work is really about working towards making a real big difference, and working towards an environmentally just society. And Dylan, he's an educational sociologist, he's a scholar activist, he's an artist. He's also the co-founder of Empathiater, and he's so many other things. And they're going to present on Lalelo Rwanda. Some of you may be already familiar with this amazing project, and I think it really sets the tone, I think, what we want to achieve with this session, how art can actually be used as a legal tool, as a legal methodology, and how theater can actually be used as a form of tribunal. And I'm hoping they're going to touch in their presentation on yeah, theater and tribunals, and it's a beautiful example, something really inspirational for any of the lawyers who may be present here. So Dylan and Kira, you've got 10 minutes, and I will interrupt your talk in a quite brutal way, which I don't want to do, if you've got 1 more minute left. Floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Saskia. We're very excited to be here today, and also just to learn from the other participants and panelists too. But today we're going to share our story of Lalelo or Wandle, and it's a story with fins because it's a story that keeps moving. And at the end, we will look at why storytelling can be a type of political intent towards change. But I'm going to start at the beginning. What happened is that we had the Italian oil and gas company, ENI, as well as a South African company, together applied to do oil and gas drilling just off the coast of the city where I'm based, in Durban, the east coast of South Africa. And this had been really contentious. Many people were sort of standing up and saying it's not something they wanted in their oceans. And PASA, who's the Petroleum Association of South Africa, agreed to meet who they were calling the community. And at this meeting, there were around 100 people coming from along our coastline. One of the things that sort of struck a few of us that were there that day is just how problematic it is when particularly the government, but sort of big industry does this too. They want to homogenize the communities as if they are one voice, and then they can arbitrate between the community and big sort of industry interests who are always promising GDP growth and jobs in this rush for the blue economy, which I'm sure many of you share in your countries. And what we wanted to do is sort of remind people to listen very closely to the different reasons why people were saying they didn't want this in their oceans, and to the different reasons that they connect to the oceans. So the research started using sort of narrative research as well as focus groups. We spoke to NGOs and activists, to fishers, to sangomas, who are traditional religious practitioners and healers, marine educators, marine scientists, even to some ex-government officials, as well as looking back into the archives around the city of Durban and how people related to the oceans. This narrative data is then woven into a piece of research-based theatre, which tells the stories of many different people living along our coastlines and how they connect to the oceans. And those connections are not just economic, are not just scientific, they are spiritual, they are cultural, and sometimes even symbolic, a sense of awe at be living near the sea. So Lalela Owandle, which in isiZulu means listen to the sea, is a theatre that shows different intergenerational meanings as well, and how oral history and passing down these understandings of the sea is fundamental to how humans make meaning with their environment. The idea is that the audience, and here we use this term of sculpting an audience with ears, doesn't just get to watch a show, but actually gets to intimately listen and be with these stories in a listening circle. And I think the interesting thing for me is that what you really get to experience here is not just one story, but a chorus of voices and what it means to listen to these together. In other words, we have to jump into the complexity and messiness of the difference and what it might mean to build solidarity across these. The show then went on a tour up and down the KwaZulu-Natal coastline. It in itself is a type of methodology. It is a catalyst really for a bigger conversation. So the play is important as storytelling, but it is not the end product. It is the beginning, an invitation to have a conversation with the audience around what it means to listen to these stories together and how we might think through complicated ideas of ocean governance and the sort of rush for the blue economy. Not only is the discussion part of the research, but afterwards the audience also fills in feedback forms, and this is really important. I think one of the things that struck us when we first started Lalela Owandle and playing it up and down KwaZulu-Natal coast in 2019 was just how important intangible heritage around the oceans is for people, and how seldom that is taken into account in policymaking and legal processes. So at the time, one of our partners, the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, there's a long history of fighting against environmental racism in Durban, used some of the research in their legal process to appeal against the application that PASA had granted to the big oil and gas company. And I think Dylan can speak more about it, but this sort of understanding of why heritage, even if it isn't yours, even if it's not, let's say, a cultural belief or a shared heritage or history, is important, that you have a right to have it protected, really started to come out quite clearly in the conversations with different audiences. Right, Dylan, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Kira. Just to carry on from that, maybe that heritage point, and then I'll get to this slide, is that what we noticed in that appeal that SETI was managing was that the only heritage that was classified legally was either shipwrecks or archaeological sites. And the intangible spiritual relationship to the sea, the idea that for many Nguni descent people, the ocean is where the ancestors dwell, was not really included or considered, and currently isn't. This intangible heritage, there isn't any legal form at the moment until recently. that holds that intangible heritage and that spiritual dimension to the ocean. So in many ways, like the ocean is sacred and it's the equivalent to heaven. And it's, for many people, it's like mining heaven, which came out through the production. But what we found in this process was that what's so powerful about the empathetic methodology is that, as Kira said, it's ongoing. So there's this process of call and response. So both in the building of the script, so as we were learning from many different worldviews and holding many different epistemologies together, carefully and delicately, we then weave that into a play and then play it back. And so for the entire tour of the production, and we currently touring it at the moment again, you having this constant conversation with society, with other citizens. And even though the deadline for that consultation period for the appeal and the EIA for that has long gone, we continue to practice this consultation and these public tribunals up and down the coastline. What that led to was the building of a kind of solidarity network, which is now called the Coastal Justice Network. My colleague Taryn Pereira and Boutle Francis. And it's a gathering of many different people working in solidarity around trying to respond to ocean injustices. This slide particularly shows how we were able to hold there isn't this binary that often gets placed upon these systems, like we're seeing that Kira said, the binary between communities is one group and the developers or the big industry is another. But actually, here in our country, many people hold many different seemingly conflicting concepts and ideas together in a whole being. And each character, this is the character of Nolwantle. She's both a marine educator, but at the same time, her grandmother was a Sangoma traditional healer and her mother was a Zionist priestess. And they had different ways of engaging spiritually and practically with the ocean. And she holds both science and spirituality in her character. And we were able to hold that in all three characters who come from different walks of life, and also have a kind of deeper conversation around the and the history of South Africa and the oceans. What has emerged from the production is through this call and response, through this kind of echolocating with each other, various other outputs. And we borrowed this term political acupuncture from our colleague Dung, and a scholar activist and artist, where we were able to carefully strategically society work with small-scale fisher leaders and other cultural rights holders, lawyers, to find places where we could transform the outcomes of this play into popular media, into policy briefs, into the activism and social mobilization. You can also access the play as a radio podcast on our site, empatheater.com, and you can listen to the whole play there as an immersive experience. And we've also produced animations and a new animation that's about... Thanks, no problem.
Sorry, Dylan, you've got 1 more minute left. Sorry.
Thanks. And so these outputs are all used strategically for kind of extra legal work. Not always, some of them have, like the blue blanket has been used as evidence in recent court cases now against Shell and other industries for seismic surveys in the country, trying to shift the narrative towards more of these intangible heritage arguments for protecting the ocean. Yes, and so what we're coming to and what we're learning through is a new kind of legal fluidity, and I borrow that term from Saskia actually, a new kind of legal fluidity in which we can work with narrative building and work with storytelling and political storytelling to open up not just conversation, but a different kind of solidarity practice amongst ocean defenders that's able to hold difference and hold many and kind of build a chorus of activism. So I think that's all the time we have. And we'll be able to show the video at the end of the presentation of the blue blankets.
Thank you so much, Dylan and Kira. And yeah, it really sets the tone, I think, of our session of what you can achieve by engaging with arts, and in this case, theater, and the methodologies you've used, and they so resonate with some of the methodologies that I've been engaging with in legal anthropology. But I think by linking it to theater, there's just another level of depth that is kind of emerging, which is really super interesting. hold on to your questions. We will have a Q&A after this next talk by Johan Aves, who's a naturalist, activist, and a writer based in Chennai, which is a coastal city in India. Johan is going to talk about art in the Pulicat Lagoon and to the Corinne in Tamil Nadu campaigns. I had a look on Johan's website, and I'm not sure if you're going to talk about that, but I looked into the work you've done with children and how art is being used, working with children, and very inspirational to see all these pictures. So Johan, the same for you, 10 minutes, and I will brutally interrupt if you've got 1 minute left.
Yeah, sure. Hey everybody, thank you Saskia. It is afternoon here where I am. Chennai is on the southeastern coast of India, and so we are moving to a geography about a few thousand miles away. And let me share my screen 1 second. So geography, this place I'll be speaking about, and this is an artistic impression by an artist called Kruti Patel, done for our campaign. It's called Pulicat. Pulicat is India's second largest brackish water lagoon. It's a kind of mosaic of ecologies, if I were to. So that's how it's also a bird sanctuary. Thousands of ibises and flamingos, waders, both resident and migrants from the northern hemisphere come here, as well as several lakh artisanal fisher folk use this space. And the whole geography, if you look at it, Chennai's largest river, Kosastalayar, in fact, it's an anglicization of the word Kotralayar, which means torrential river, kind of molds and melds into this lagoon, which is then buffered by sand barrier islands on its eastern edge from the sea. So the sea ripples in, it's a sheltered marine space. And so its nature, both as a hosting space and nursery ground for marine and brackish species, is very significant. It is also Chennai's biggest climate buffer. So we face, I think just before the meeting, we were speaking about floods. We face tremendous cyclones and floods during the northeast monsoon, October, November, December. And Pulicat and Kosastalayar's basin is our largest kind of flood catchment area. It is also, its sand barrier islands, its mangroves shelter us, kind of buffer the velocity of cyclones, which always come to us from the northeast. And what threatens this space is a mega port by the international group, which perhaps people have heard about, Adani Group, a multinational corporate. They plan to build a massive port of 6,111 acres, most of which will be, they use the word reclaiming ocean land, strangely. And one dynamic to understand, I'll just speak about it a little bit, just to understand the geography before looking at artistic interventions. This is how the north of Chennai looks like. And if you look at Chennai, north of Chennai is where a whole lot of indigenous people live, fisher folk, tribals, what here we call scheduled tribes, scheduled caste people. And then in the south, historically, the property owners, the zamindars, and so forth live. And interestingly, when the British came in to colonize, they built all their dirty industries in the north of the area, not because it was a right place. It is a watery landscape, but all the red category industries, the fertilizer factories, the power stations, all of it is in North Chennai. And this kind of colonial practice continues because politically, as such, people lack a voice, or even financially, socioeconomically, even. And this continues. So all the ports are still proposed there. And that place is even more populated than the south of Chennai. Yeah. So when you build something on the eastern coast of India, on the south, the sand aggregates, sandy beaches are actually slow flowing rivers. And when you, this is just north of a harbor called Pondicherry Harbor. And within 3 months, that village vanished from the maps. And that is the strength of longshore currents here. So what would happen because of the port which is proposed to the south of this lagoon is that it would erase this entire sand structure, which makes it a lagoon, and merge it with the sea. So we've been campaigning in a range of ways. I hope to quickly introduce 4 interventions. So one is a poem. It's called Growth with Goodness. It's the title is both a cliche and it's the tagline of the Adani Group. So the poem goes like this. Here by the drying silver biddies, under the circling sea eagle, fisher children play a game with the hardy wind. Standing in a line, they drop spiky seed heads of spinifex grass downwind. Jumping, cheering, shouting, clapping, they watch their tumbleweeds race down the sand. When will they know that their home beach is to be erased from the maps? Their hamlets, sand dunes, flocks of stints like murmuring rain clouds, mother olive ridleys, mangroves, even the boundless Kosastalaya, invisible to the port builder. Coal from beneath 1,000-ton songlines is to reach here soon, drown this lagoon. Pulicat, Mundra, Mumbai, Talabira, Bailadila, Vilinyam, Hasdio, Kamudi, Godda, Galilee Basin, the Great Barrier Reef. Growth with goodness, posh words for plunder. Now the places I read out are places where this MNC is committing or has committed ecocide, and it's all over the world. And these spaces are kind of interlinked by their trade links as such. So going back, some of the big studies, their pre-feasibility report, their public hearing, they wanted to do during a pandemic where it was literally forbidden to come out and protest on the ground. So something we did was a mass protest. We said, stop Adani, save Pulicat. And indigenous people across the coast and others, activists, teachers, students, we did this. And it caught. So our strategy here was largely a public campaign, more than it was legal. We reach the legal phase only when completely our lifelines are out and we say, okay, there's nothing else to do but reach, go to court. Yeah. So this was one powerful way which drew a lot of attention. One of the things teachers like me, we did was in my school as well as we went from school to school and we told the story of Pulicat, and we asked children and students from college, can you make art for us? We'd like to make a press conference. We'd like to make an exhibition. And so this is some of the art which came in. Some unapologetically political, others not so much. And then we held a press conference with this art. And what happened was it drew so much media attention that a public hearing for this port, this man is one of the richest richest companies in the world. We were able to get that public hearing cancelled that very day after the conference using art, because of the kind of media, support it got, and the fact that it was something novel and it was something moving and powerful, and something which in a sense was accessible to people to look, understand, and be moved powerfully. And the beautiful thing about the campaign was that much of the art came from children. So, this is one of the news articles which was published by a eminent newspaper here. Hundreds of school children had created this art, and we had a way of putting that all across the hallway and into the conference hall where this press walked in. One more intervention was this. So this is called a column. A column is a traditional kind of decoration done in Tamil Nadu, where you take rice flour and you put it outside, And it draws from an animistic tradition of feeding the non-human, the ants and the insects, before you actually get ready and you feed yourself at home. And this is practiced, very prevalently in the villages. It might have kind of not entirely holds that meaning still, because now, chemical colors and all of that is used, but that it draws from that practice. And so we did a column protest where, fisher folk, other people, we drew columns on the Pongal day, which is the day of harvest of paddy in the mid-January here.
One more minute.
Yeah. So, and we had columns coming from across the Chennai coast on asking to stop Adani, save Pulicat. So, a couple of pictures of that. And yeah, so that summarizes our campaign, and perhaps I could share a couple of links if people would like to read about it a bit more. And it is still an ongoing thing. We've had small victories, and art has been a powerful tool to mediate that, and especially evoke the place and its what it stands for, its life, in a way which draws in public eyes, which papers and signs and other kinds of things was not able to. Yeah, so with that I'll stop. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yuvan, and I think what your work really shows nicely is not just the art, but I also think the power of the children, and it's a discussion that's also very lively where I am at the moment, is how children are so much better in the activism than particularly my generation, and that we need to show more solidarity with them. So I think, yeah, what you just presented is a really good example of that. So we've got 12 minutes for discussions. It would be wonderful. It's about 34 of us. If you feel comfortable, if you can put on your screen when you ask a question. Obviously, if you don't feel comfortable with that, you're also very welcome to put it in the chat box. I will try to keep an eye, and maybe Kira also can keep an eye on that as well. And yeah, if you have a question, it would be nice to just introduce yourself, who you are and where you're calling from, so we get a better sense with whom we're in dialogue with. So I open the floor for questions. Anyone who has a question and brave enough to, oh, okay. Elaine, please.
Hi, thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear about your work, Yuvan. I've heard about Lalila Wandley about 10 times, and every time it just strikes me how amazing it is, and I get equally excited no matter how many times I've heard about it. I have a question, first of all, for Dylan and Kira. I'd love to know more about the extent to which decision makers engaged with the work, and what their response has been, and to what extent has that been different from other participants, like interested citizens and communities. And then a question for Yuvan and possibly Dylan and Kira as well, if you'd like to. The work that you talked about was rooted in a very specific kind of political contestation. And I wonder to what extent engaging with art in these kind of ways can work as a preventative kind of mechanism that's, kind of forward-looking, but not rooted in a particular kind of political threat. It seemed that lent a very urgent dimension to the work, and I imagine therefore that drew people in. So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on, that kind of preventative function. Thank you.
Thanks, Saskia. Shall I start with that?
Yeah. If
Okay.
it's okay, I like taking questions one by one. It's just my brain can't hold all of it. So I'm just assuming that other people will be appreciative of that as well.
I'm appreciative of it, definitely. The question of decision makers, I think, is really an important one. And in fact, we played Lalela Owandle last night at a big marine science conference and the day before. And that question often comes up even with the audience. People want to know who, can we play it to government officials is normally the question. And there's two things. One is that, as we know, governance is a very complex system. And in fact, decision makers can sit in many different positions, not only in government. So what we've tried to do is also the audience, part of the strategy behind the scenes is getting the people in the room who we think need to hear this conversation. And not only where they're sitting just as themselves, but sitting also with members of the public. So I would say there's two groups so far that it's been very interesting having these conversations and having them part of the audience. And in a sense, they are important decision makers, even if they aren't government. The one are conservation officers who work for conservation management agencies in South Africa, who the state pays to manage marine protected areas or sort of dedicated conservation areas, where a lot of the tensions around the right to practice your cultural beliefs and the right to enter back onto land that you were forcibly removed from during apartheid in order to visit either sacred spaces or to collect marine resources which are used for medicine and healing, came out in the research. So what you can see is that obviously not for everyone, but for many of the conservation officers, and actually particularly for the younger conservation officers who are moving into this space, this play was very emotional. And they said, made them think very hard and critically about some of the roles that they were playing. We had a young conservation officer who was in training say that it made her, for the first time, sort of open her eyes to the sort of sadness that just this afternoon she had been training in the field with an old isiZulu healer who knows all the plants so that she can guide wealthier visitors to the park. But this is his land and he's not allowed to live on it anymore. And what does this mean to be in these spaces? The marine scientists are also very powerful decision makers. That is true around the world with ocean policy. And in South Africa, we have an uneasy tension there too between science and some of the past and current exclusions. So that's, we are, I think, starting to have those conversations in very productive ways, sometimes very difficult ways with marine scientists. Government is a long, hard journey. And Dylan can maybe tell you that in the past with MP Theatre, sometimes it takes 4 years to get into government spaces. So with another project that Dylan headed up, Uwembu was a play around street level drug addiction, eventually got played in Parliament to very high senior level officials. I don't know, Dylan, if you want to speak about what that's like to play it to that sort of an audience.
Yeah, I mean, and it did shift some things, but I think your question, Elaine, also around the proactive, or I would call it proactive rather than preventative, but the proactive nature in which we hold these tribunals really opens up this kind of extra legal change that can happen without having to go through a policy process. So with the drug example, the street level drug project, there was some massive reform within police reform that didn't require policy change, but actually emerged from these kind of dialogues and tribunals. And we're seeing the same thing between, like Kira said, relationships between marine scientists and communities and small-scale fisher leaders and artisanal fishers. But the other thing to say, there was a question by Lisa in the chat, was that there has been this, because these are public conversations and they refuse to accept the deadlines imposed by government for consultation by interested and affected parties, by the state, we have an ongoing kind of permanent conference, a permanent tribunal through the play with citizens to build solidarity. And the intergenerational solidarity has been particularly interesting. A lot of young, because the play deals a lot with intangible heritages, a lot of young people haven't had the space or the room or the affirmation to talk about their relationship, their spiritual relationship to the sea, or to understand their grandparents' perspectives opposed to the ones that they're learning at school, where one of our big focuses now is ocean literacy, which is so science heavy and positivist, doesn't have a lot of richness around cultural and spiritual relationships to the ocean that need to be put into new critical ocean literacy processes. So we're trying to use that, and the new animations and some of our other work that's coming out of livelihoods is trying to respond to that transgenerational, more proactive relationship, so we can kind of mend some of these binaries that have emerged.
Thank you. Yuvan, you want to answer the question?
Yeah. So quickly, so I'll interpret preventative as proactive, just as Dylan did, and to kind of come at it from a different way. The whole the usage of art came into kind of Indian, especially youth activism during the pandemic, when on-the-ground action wasn't possible, and that was also a time when the National Board for Wildlife, a national body, 40 contentious large, coal mines, ports, dams, which were there in not being cleared for decades, just cleared them all in one single meeting, because people could not go to the hearings or show dissent in a way. So during that time, art as a way of and use of social media came about in a very powerful way, and in a lot of places it actually won. So what we replicated for Pulicat was from a campaign we were part of in a place called Dehing Patkai in Assam, a state in India, northeast of India, where more than 100-acre coal mine was proposed in prime, ancestral lands, elephant corridor, and everything. And Assamese students, hundreds of art every single day, and I was curating this. I was writing to students, getting this and putting it in places. And I would get up in the morning and I would check social media, another 100, another 200. It went berserk. And within about 4 months of that, the CM intervened and said, hold it, let's talk about it, and it was cancelled. It had a way of drawing in public engagement. It kind of commonizes the issue in a way which other kinds of interventions, which are important, but did not have this advantage.
Thank you. Megan, do you want to ask your question? I saw you had your hand raised. You put it also in the chat box, but if you're happy to maybe just ask your question.
Hi, yes. Thank you. My question was for you, Ivan, about the word that you used, songlines, in your poem. And I'm wondering, I'm picking up on the sort of weaving threads going on here around listening into ecotones and environments and everything involved, everything in these kinds of spaces that are so filled with difference. And I'm wondering what you were asking us to listen to by using that word songlines. Just to repeat the line, it says, "Coal from beneath 1,000 torn songlines."
Yeah. So one of the largest coal mines, which takes up about more than 2% of global carbon budget, is the Galilee Basin coal mine of the Adani Group. They are mining right adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef, and the word songlines is from there. So where the tribes there, they have a cosmology of a dreaming, where ancestral beings sang places into being, and through those songs, places, place names, linkages are remembered. There's a beautiful book on songlines by Bruce Chatwin. So songlines is a Australian Aboriginal word, and the port being built in Chennai would be receiving coal mined from there. So that's the connection.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Just to make a link to my own work and kind of abusing my position here of chairing. I've used, there's been a really famous case in Australia with how songlines have been used in native title claims, the Ngurra canvas, where people have drawn their songlines on the canvas and actually asked judges to walk on the canvas in order to experience the land and the performativity of the law. So a really very powerful, metaphor, but it's more than a metaphor. It's something that is really embodied and links to the dreaming and the ancestors. We've got time for one more question, and Stephen, they've been waiting very patiently, so the floor is yours to ask your question.
Well, thank you for the wonderful presentations. I'm interested in how your groups work and how they are sustained, the kind of methodologies that have developed for the kind of collective production that you have to do, and the kind of social relations that have to evolve and develop in order to sustain it. My own background is I've worked in a theatre company when I was much younger and observed that sort of group dynamic and how productive it is in enabling an individual to be a lot braver than they might be in isolation. Thanks. I look forward to your answer.
Kira or Dylan?
Dylan, do you want to start with that?
Yes, I mean, with how we sustain it, I was just wondering if it was regards to like financially, because they are quite intensive, and to kind of keep a theatre company going, it requires a lot of help. And we're very grateful to the One Ocean Hub, which has funded a lot of the work recently for Lalela Lwantle and others, and kind of kept amphitheatre going. But we really do work on like sometimes a string and a prayer and like everything in between, and lots of duct tape. But I think the sustaining also is around some of this work requires a lot of emotional labor that needs to be very carefully thought through, and supporting your team very much with debriefs and holding together some of the quite complex emotional labor that is required. But that same emotional work is what kind of disarms people in a space that would say things that they normally wouldn't. We've had also very complex, and I think Kira could speak to this more, but we'd had interesting conversations around racialization in South Africa and race politics that could come out and how they were played out in the ocean space, in conversations that are very difficult to have otherwise. But with this grounding and foundation, we were able to actually look at that and stay with that trouble in a new way. I would love to go into those in more detail, but that's maybe an example of some of the complexity we were able to navigate because of theatre that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
And maybe, Stephen, I'll answer in a more practical way, if that's all right, because I think that, you know, often we get asked to be like, well, how do you do this? Because it's a lot of people in the MP Theatre team, and that does require trying to find funds to do that. So one of the things that is, for me, just been so humbling and such an honor to work in this collective is that the researchers are part of the creative process as the creatives are part of the research process. But that also has enabled us to look for research funding. So some of the other projects are sort of traditional research funds where the funder has enabled us to be experimental, and then luckily be happy about that. So a lot of the funding is coming through university actually. And then now that MP Theatre has built a name for itself, and rightly so, it's allowed Dylan and Neil and Mpume to access other funds which are more arts-based. But actually the sustainability is coming through research methodology up until today. We'll see where it goes, but it's always a question on the horizon.
Thanks, and thanks for that question. It's something that is so important, and I think from what I sort of gathered speaking to artists, that the funding is such a crucial issue, and that there is often a kind of expectations from funders that artists work for free. It's something that came up a lot in the discussions here we're having with artists. So I think it's really good, yeah, really good to open up that discussion. So thank you very much for all your interesting questions, and thank you so much to our fantastic two presentations. So I'm delighted now to present Megan Judge, who's a researcher and an artist based in Cape Town and Johannesburg. And we're going to engage with a different form of arts, and her vibrational compositions are, I had the luxury and the privilege to have a pre-sound and quite meditative. And I think, yeah, I think we're in for a treat. And I'll let Megan introduce her work, and we're going on a journey, I think.
Thank you so much. Yes, I welcome you all to a just a 5 minutes interlude listening experience. The track does continue afterwards, and you're welcome to return to it. We'll pop it in the chat, but we'll just listen to it for 5 minutes. Because of the silence, the intimacy that it requires, it is important that everyone turns off the microphones while listening. If you have headphones, it would really also help with your listening experience. But just to mention that in this case, art is really taken up as a mode for inquiring. So I'm following and listening into the ocean and into the shoreline, where the ocean and the shoreline kind of interact through different apparatuses. And it's a kind of a risk-taking figuration of how to utilize art to understand more deeply. And it's a necessary risk-taking one, because it really churns at the binaries of ideas of separation and draws things up and allows that to kind of become a process for revealing clues, clues that reveal a kind of understanding for human-ocean relations. So we will remain on this page, and I hope everyone is challenged and enjoys this experience to some degree.
Thank you, Megan. I think your work really speaks to this human, non-human relationship, and it's something so important, but particularly if you sort of link it to a legal practice, and the question of language, that is kind of a really important issue that we need to address as lawyers. If we're thinking about environmental justice, also the movement around rights of nature, how are we going to present these kind of relationships, that these interrelationships, it cannot be done in a human language. And I think this is again where art can play such an important role for us to immerse ourselves in these other languages in order to understand these entanglements. And I think your work, your composition is a really good example of that. So moving on to another presentation, we're really on a tour here. So I'm delighted to present you Michaela House. Michaela is an artist, a researcher and a teacher, but she's also the director and the manager of the Kaskama Art Project. This is a project that's really close to my heart, and there are a few knitters on this call. And I think tapestry, weaving, crochet, knitting are really important crafts and understandings, how we can, by using our hands and doing the crafting, that we also have a very embodied understanding what the law actually can be. So I'm really looking forward to hear more about the tapestry project you're going to talk about, and how different ocean narratives are developing, evolving through the stitching. So 10 minutes for you as well.
Thanks, Saskia. The Kaskama Art Project is part of the Kaskama Trust, which I will explain. And we have Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings where we can hardly get everyone sort of audible in the room. And it's quite phenomenal to have this immersive experience online, Megan, like in such an extraordinary way in comparison to how hard it is for us to even just have management meetings and hear each other. I'm going to share my screen and just start this presentation. Just tell me if that's... Oops. Okay. Yes, so I am managing Kaskama Art Project, but it's interesting in the definition of that role. I think it's hugely curatorial. A lot of my previous work has to do with curatorship, and it's become so ubiquitous as a word. And I think the more ubiquitous it becomes, the more critical one has to be about what it actually means. The word comes from the Latin word curare, which means to actually care for. And I think depending on the context in which one works, it's a very difficult question to ask yourself in terms of what does it really mean to care for something, or to care for art, or to care for artists, or to care for a community. So I think critical curatorship is the question, and that has a lot to do with context. It's something that I feel is deeply political because it involves understanding the past. It involves having some stake in the future, because often one is mediating the past in a particular way. So certainly arts practice is on that cusp or in that pivotal moment. And yeah, I think it's intimately linked to this political moment in curatorship. So just briefly, the Kaskama Art Project, I'll read this, is part of the greater Kaskama Trust, as I explained, which is a South African not-for-profit organization dedicated to the holistic care of the communities that live in the area alongside the Kaskama River in the Eastern Cape. The trust began with a healing vision to restore hope and dignity to people with very few resources living at the precipice of change. It was founded in 2000 by artist and Dr. Carol Hofmeyer. Today, the Kaskama Art Project, the flagship of the Greater Trust, works to maintain its founder's vision, providing vital livelihoods through dignified work, while communicating through art the reality of rural lives affected by both poverty and history. So there definitely is a context for the work that is being produced. The context is Hamburg, this little village alongside the Kaskama River and the neighboring villages. And as I mentioned, when Carol Hofmeyr moved to Hamburg in about 2000, I think what was so striking was the beauty of the area, an area that is culturally and environmentally incredibly rich and yet so poor economically, technologically, and in education. And also a context with a strong, affected by history in a huge way. I think in South Africa, in a sort of, the history is a continuum, but through colonialism, apartheid, and recent history, it is an area that has experienced marginalization and subjugation constantly. So this is one of the first works of Kaskama, well, not one of the first works of Kaskama project, but a very important work called the Guernica, the Kaskama Guernica. And the art project really became a voice piece for talking about context. And when Carol came to Hamburg and started the project, you know, a lot of people in the village were very ill and dying, and nobody even knew what was happening. And it was actually, people were being completely ravaged through HIV and AIDS. There was no treatment in the area. This work was made in 2012, actually, as a very angry response to the way South African government had handled the crisis. But previously, some years earlier, another monumental work was created by Kaskama Art Project, the Kaskama altarpiece. You really need to see this in life, as it's enormous. It's modeled on the Isenheim altarpiece, which depicts Christ bearing the diseases of the village in Germany where this altarpiece is. And this is a rendition of that altarpiece, but told through the community of Hamburg and their experience. That's the outside. It opens and it presents, this was earlier on in 2005, a very positive vision. But I hope what's clear is that the arts in community and in the trust is part of a very holistic vision. Health and art are completely linked. Now we have a program, we have health, art, education, and music. And all of this is to support the mandate of the trust of really supporting healthy communities in every respect. And it comes through in the way, in the art, in fact, that's very integrated, a very integrated form of life. This is the inside, it opens twice, and this is the inside of the altarpiece. But yeah, really very excitingly, in 2021, at the beginning of 21, we applied to the One Ocean Hub, to the Deep Fund, for a commission to make an artwork that actually centered around the ocean. And our starting point, because it was so focused on ocean stewardship and conservation, we felt, well, what if we explored as Dylan was mentioning, the actual spiritual connection to the ocean that most of the people in Hamburg and surrounding areas actually have. And we actually won that commission, and we started with an incredible workshop with the elders. We had 10 elders of the village with us and people from the art project, and with simple questions. And I'm sorry I don't have footage from that workshop, but we've created an archive of stories, and the most incredible stories came up. That belief that the ancestors live beneath the ocean is still widely held. But all water sources, in fact, are sacred. And there's still, amongst the very, very old women, there's still stories about seeing the mermaid. The mermaid is also quite a magical and sort of symbol in Hamburg, but the ocean is a place for healing. The ocean is a place where married couples go to fix their hearts. It's the water is medicine. It's brought back into the villages to help animals, to cure the sick. It's a place for baptisms. It's a place for prayer. And this was our initial design that came out of the stories we recorded from the elders, but then we also sent out questionnaires to all of our members. So we have about 25 to 30, sometimes 35 embroiderers working for us every month, and about 9 permanent members. And people answered those questions quite incredibly, but also drew. So then it was the work of Ndileka Mapuma at Podium Studio to integrate all of these stories and these drawings into this design, which we hoped would turn. This is the process coming along. The work is circular and 3 meters wide. You can see the lovers, you can see baptism, you can see a sangoma, you can see a traditional ceremony, someone sacrificing a goat. Often, I mean, walking on the beach at Hamburg, candles wash up, whiskey bottles wash up, gifts for the ancestors sometimes wash back up onto the beach. So fairly recently, so this was a year-long process, and a couple of weeks ago, we had a closing ceremony where we presented the work to the elders who'd been at our original workshop, and unfortunately, 2 members had actually passed away, but you can see it on the floor there, not quite finished. And as part of this workshop, we also went on a beach walk together, which was amazing. And it was the first time a lot of not the first time, but not for a long time, had many of the elders actually been able to go down to the beach. And we collected shells to finish off the work with, to thread some shells on a strand. And the 4 of the elders actually said, please, could they do the threading of the shells, which was really wonderful. Just more pictures of that beach walk. I'm not really touching on the theoretical aspects of this, but the strength, the sort of intergenerational strength of this work is extraordinary. And the time we created for people to tell their stories was quite magical. And it's hard to find the words for the kind of presence that was felt during those workshops and the appreciation of the younger people in our project, because there's never time to tell stories anymore. There's never time to actually hear what the elders remember.
1 more minute, Michaela, sorry.
So yesterday, we actually installed the finished work in Makanda for the National Arts Festival, and the pivot is a very old 1920s wheelbarrow wheel. So that's just a picture to begin with. And here's a little video of the finished work. You can see some of the shell strands around the edges. So it turns on that wheel. Some of our team who helped install, that's Veronica. Another little video. I mean, what was so strong was that the ocean was not just a place that supported livelihoods and a source of food. You know, it was something, a place that was sacred. And that was how we began this journey, was saying, can the sacred not be the cornerstone of a new kind of stewardship? Because when something is sacred, we want to keep it sacred and preserve it as, yeah, and make sure that that very, very sacred place is not destroyed. So just in Kaiskama's work, yes, some measures are quantitative. We are a job creation project, and it's very important the kind of incomes we bring in.
Sorry, Michaela, I'm afraid I will have to ask you to wrap it up. I'm so sorry. I wish I could give you another hour, but unfortunately we need to wrap it up.
Yes, this is, so maybe just to end, something that Dylan pointed out about having our circle turning on the ground. almost like a big map. You know, it was always the way Africa was carved up above big maps. It's significant that the circle turns, that we are turning a tide, that there's something intergenerational about this, and that the artwork in itself becomes a vehicle for storytelling. And that memory can kind of be preserved through the act of sewing. So just quite a lovely thought of Dylan's, that this can no longer be a situation of division, but actually what we're doing through the artwork is reconnecting. Yeah, I'll wrap it up there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michaela. And I'm so sorry that I have to do this ungrateful job to like cutting people short, but I really like how you ended with the kind of making the connections, and because dignity is so at the heart of this work, and it just reminds me of my colleague's work who's on the call. Elaine Webster also works as a human rights lawyer on dignity, and again, such a beautiful example then where the two start to, you know, where you can start building bridges, and how law and art can actually work together. So originally the plan was that we would have another speaker, Eric Ochere, who's a teacher and a researcher at the University of the Cape Coast in Ghana. He works in the music and dance department. But unfortunately, Eric has been having a very difficult morning with flooding and really struggles to join us. But I'm sure we all can send him lots of good vibes and well wishes to deal with the flooding. And it just shows us how important it is that we do this work, and the urgency. So I'm sure as a group that we wish him all the best with the challenges he's facing this morning. We're running a little bit over time, but I still would like to give the floor to the audience, maybe for one or two questions, and then we have Dylan's blue blanket, and then I was supposed to wrap it up, but I feel I've already said too much as a chair, so I think we can kind of skip that. And I sort of started to make links between art and law, so I think it's not hugely important that I have the final word on this. So one or two questions from the audience, short questions, please. Yes, Kira?
Sorry, I'm so interested both from Michaela, but also from Yvonne as well. Like the process of creating the artwork, I'm interested to know what are some of the questions that people had whilst they were creating this around environmental issues. I'm just wondering if anything really interesting came out, maybe something unexpected, perhaps not. Like what the process of making, what was it doing to people's thinking?
Ella, maybe you want to take the question?
I wonder if it was so much as in the process of making, as there was such a powerful process of sharing that happened, you know, in the telling of stories. One of the members who was in our first workshop, Artwell, the process of making connections is incredible. I mean, his brother-in-law does incredible artwork with shells and is covered, he's also a driver, and has covered his dashboard in this incredible kind of mosaic of shells. And he was just sort of starting to talk about how all of these things kind of come together, and why don't we go as a community every month and just be together and walk on the beach together. And you know, it was like there was so much emerging, and that was actually the idea behind actually going on this beach walk in the sort of closing ceremony, and sharing again with the elders how they felt to be on the beach. So in the giving time for things, a lot of connections are made, but then also bringing those shells like back into the artwork and collecting some of the bottle tops that had washed up. You know, the art project, it's almost like an art school as well. So we slowly bring those questions of like how the medium kind of speaks back to the environment, and what does it mean when we communicate with specific mediums. And there was the question of using the Hessian. You know, Hessian used to be something that actually was worn traditionally by isiXhosa speakers and underneath certain things were sewn onto Hessians. So we, in the process of making, for us, it's very linked to the storytelling process. And I think a lot of the emergence happens there. But also it was lovely bringing in this new medium of shells and of something collected and of something that kind of holds a memory, you know. It was just so lovely. So I don't think I explained that idea of the circle so well, but Megan, you said it so beautifully, like amazing temporal proposition for keeping stories. Absolutely, you know, it's sort of, and sewing is so interesting because you kind of sewing in what you collect into something, and as it turns, it tells stories. So there's a kind of circular, or not circular, but a so hard to describe in linear terms, but a lot of emergence going in and then coming out. So in that process of making, ideas emerge for the living. From the process of living, ideas emerge for the art. I don't know if that speaks to the question at all.
Thank you, Michaela. Any other question? No? Okay. Cool.
Dina has her hand up, Saskia.
Sorry?
Dina has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that, Dina. I'm sorry. Please go for it.
My question is maybe for all of you, but I guess it's about sort of art production and then consumption and that relationship. So I'm a lawyer, and there's something sort of that I've been thinking about a lot in the ways in which sort of legal outputs, so court cases or legislation, or, you know, the sort of things we produce as lawyers, ways they get kind of distorted and reused and rearticulated through consumption. So the ways they get kind of remade productively, affidavits get turned into sort of pieces of storytelling and resistance, court cases sort of outcomes get turned into protest movement. You know, there's this sort of remaking of legal outputs that is often a kind of a pushback and a resistance and a distortion, right? But I was wondering about the ways in which like the tapestry, or Megan, your sound piece, or sort of the pieces of theatre get sort of consumed in distorting ways that aren't, that sort of create a tension there, you know. So where there's a distortion that changes meaning. So Michaela, where the tapestry kind of gets consumed or reproduced, or you know, in ways that take it away from the stories of the elders on the beach. That's not really a question, but there's a question, but I'm going to end that sentence with a question mark, and maybe ask for your thoughts on that.
In the interest of time, I don't think we have the time to get the answer from all of our participants here, but Megan, would you maybe want to take the question?
Sure, I could take that because yeah, that's what is of interest to me and why I've chosen to stay with something that's generates some form of discomfort. So one of the first times I explored sonic as a space of discomfort and politicizing the term discomfort, questioning what is comfort, what you hold on to when it comes to terror and ocean, and having experienced sailing into the ocean myself and having to release comfort associated with terror so that I could fully face ocean and allow oceanic to come in more. That's I guess the kind of context for working with discomfort in a productive way, I hope, in a way that plays with tension. So sorry, to circle back, one of the first times I was exploring this and sharing it with some people, one of the people who was listening into the piece I was sharing, their roommate got up and walked out, and they were like, "What's this noise?" and kind of couldn't handle it, you know. And I was sharing that in comparison to another very meditative piece that really took you on a journey and allowed you to arrive in the ocean in a very beautiful, safe, specifically designed place. And at that moment, I realized that I'm going to start working with discomfort because it brings into question your own overdetermined comforts that often don't get churned with. And if we're wanting to work with human-ocean relations, there's a lot of terror hold and overdetermined sensing that comes in with our build, our figuration. So if we can get at something that questions the figuration of what we are and allows a more porous breathability for climates of difference, then I feel like I'm actually doing some work here that's, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. It's something that excites me, and that tension is something that I find intriguing as a line of inquiry to follow. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but again, it's I won't leave it with a question mark. I hope it's useful.
That's great, and I think this discomfort is also a starting point to do the learning, which I think is so important, particularly for the lawyers amongst us. I think we need to be open-minded and question our own practice and our own indoctrination, how we've studied law. And I think that discomfort is absolutely needed for us to start questioning that. So unfortunately, I mean, where's the time? It just goes so quickly. So Dylan is going to share more of the work they've been doing with the One Ocean Hub and the Blue Blanket, which is absolutely mesmerizing. So I think it's really beautiful that we're going to end with that. So Dylan, if you're ready to share that.
When you see us from the shore, we become a blue blanket bending towards the horizon. You think, what a beautiful view. See how those waves build and fall like ice melting. Over the millions of years of our existence, we have watched you come and go in all your forms. We have blessed the warriors of the Amagqiha, the Amadlambe, the Amaqonukhwebe, the Amampondo. We have held the nets of fishermen and fed countless villages. From this sunken blueness, back when cattle roamed far and wide, we watched the ships arrive, fluttering flotillas from far-flung empires on a quest to conquer and carve up the land. Now they are coming for us. Men stand on these shores with clipboards and hard heads pointing at us and making numbers in the air. 50K, millions, billions. Sometimes we gather the cormorants to float like funeral pyres on the surface to scare the men away, and yet they continue. If you spend a moment underwater with us, you would understand why every seismic boom is a wound, every cheap packet a too bright piece of confetti added to the sewage you pump into us. The churn of drills you grind into us, the slicks of dead sea birds you leave in your wake. 50K, millions, billions. If you could feel with us, you would know that our indigo depths is where the ancestors rest. They are called here when their earthly life is over, and to abantu abamhlophe who enter us to speak with the spirit world and learn how to become healers, this is their heaven. Dive deeper and it becomes darker, but not in the way grace feels or a nightmare. No, this dark is like being in the center of your heart, within and with everything, as the water hangs around you in an amniotic suspension. And then she comes, her body larger than your imagination. She circles you, that orb eye taking you in, friend or foe. Then she comes closer, hanging in awkward time, as though asking, why are you here? Who sent you? Are those your tracks I saw on the shore? We have thrown blue over her during every birth. We have given her remote caves for every grief. We have held her in the air for joy and corralled the creel. But now, sure, the men in hats want to extract liquid ancestors from us. Puffed up with greed, with numbers for eyes, they want to blast us with air guns all day and night, while the rest of the world turns its back on fossilized fuels. How have your leaders allowed this? What are promises at climate conferences when they are so blatantly broken? How many kilometers of the ancestral realm will need to be disturbed before you rethink your futures? What will happen to those fishing families who we have fed for generations? Will you feed them oil? Dive deep into the center of your heart and answer these questions for yourself.
Thank you, Dylan, for sharing this magical piece on all different levels. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our session, and I've got the feeling that there is appetite to go on for a whole day. And I'm so damn lucky that I actually can continue with talking about art, science, and law in the workshop that I'm intending, and sort of being really fully immersed in it. But I hope that this is just a starting point of something that can grow. And arts and science, they've been working together for so long, and it's just I'm one of the only lawyers being invited into this space here, and it's just amazing how law and art has not, that we haven't sort of really explored this further. So I really hope things are stewing away here, and I hope we after this week we will be starting working on something. And I would like to thank all our speakers, all the participants, Dina and Kira for organizing, and apologies for going a little bit over time, but thank you so much. And I don't know if Dina and Kira, if you want to say something as the final message.
Just to say thank you so much, and thank you to all the presenters who agreed to join us. It's just been wonderful being with you all today. Thank you, everyone.
And an echo of those thanks, a huge thank you to our presenters. This has been an extraordinary panel, and I think an incredibly rich contribution to the school. I think it just adds a dimension and a kind of nuance and a complexity and a way and an approach and a methodology for thinking about water and rights and environment and law and resistance in a totally different way. And I think, and I just feel incredibly grateful that it's been part of our school this year. The session has been recorded, so you can come back and watch it again and again and again, as I'm sure many of you will want to, and we'll put it on our YouTube page and our website. We have lots of really fantastic sessions coming up. I think our next panel is going to be looking at water and gender, and we have some fascinating speakers talking about women fishers and resistance and defenders, so lots of overlap with the themes that we've been talking about in this session. So please do come back and join us for the rest of the panels. Thank you, Dylan, Kira, Yvonne, Michaela, Megan for these amazing presentations of your incredible work. Thank you, Saskia, for doing the sometimes miserable work of being our moderator and timekeeper today. And thank you to all of our audience for engaging and your questions and being here. The chat saves automatically. We will try and keep it somewhere because I think it's just been a wealth of comments and resources. So maybe we'll put it up on the website as well. And see you hopefully all in like 25 minutes.
Stay well,
Thank you, everyone.
Take
care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.